Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Welcome back to the Core Women Podcast, where we explore the stories of educators, innovators, and leaders creating lasting impact through resilience and purpose. Today's guest is Dr. Meghan Waldron, an educator, academic advisor, and founder of Smart Solutions Tutoring, a Richmond-based business that has helped thousands of students grow as writers and learners over the past 2 decades. Living with multiple sclerosis and raising 3 sons, Meghan is a model of authentic leadership and strategic resilience, showing up with purpose, creativity, and grit. This is a conversation about growth, grit, and rewriting the rules of learning, both in and out of the classroom. Welcome, Dr. Waldron.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. That was really awesome to hear. I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. But before we dive into your professional journey, if you could describe your life to this point in one word, what would that word be and why?
All right. So, Summer, as an English teacher, I pondered over this question a lot this week, but I landed on metamorphic. That's my word.
Ooh, I love that. Okay, so the development of our birth and rediscovery of ourselves. So tell me your definition of that.
Yeah. So, obviously, metamorphosis, I think people are familiar with, but when something's metamorphic, it forms under pressure. So, I think my life and my business, both, I would argue, kind of formed under pressure. So, if they're fundamentally different than they were in their original form, and none of us really want that type of pressure or for different situations to happen. But at the end of the day, I think it grows us in ways that we didn't really anticipate.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh. So as we get into these questions, I'm sure we'll discover some of that metamorphic journey.
Sure.
But if you could give me one example of metamorphic in your life as things developed under pressure, just one example.
Yeah. So, Summer, I think I would describe my upbringing as pretty normal, pretty routine. I have 2 siblings. They're also entrepreneurs. We grew up in the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C. My mom was an educator. So, pretty normal upbringing. Same with college. And then in my early 20s, we moved to Richmond and I decided I was going to leave the classroom. I'd been teaching right outside of DC for about 6 years and I was going to stay at home with my son. Shortly thereafter, I started Smart Solutions. So, it's about 20 years old as well. And then we found out that we were blessed with twins. And shortly thereafter, I found out that our boys had a condition called twin to twin transfusion syndrome, which is a really, really difficult diagnosis. And it put me on bed rest right away. And unfortunately, one of our twin boys passed away at 3 weeks. And my middle son, Matthew, spent 97 days in the hospital. So up until that point, I would argue that my life was pretty routine. And then I was thrown into this world that I never knew existed in the NICU, dealing with the loss of one child, 18-month-old at home, and then obviously a son in the hospital as well. So that was really my first test of like, how am I going to get through this? And I think that foundation that I had that I kind of just saw as routine and normal and just very vanilla up until that point, I think it's that foundation that actually allowed me to kind of work through that grief and to really embrace it. It was extremely challenging. I was fortunate to sync up with the March of Dimes during that time. And it was when the internet had just emerged, Facebook, people were kind of getting on it. This is around 2008. And I started blogging. And as a writer and as an English teacher, that was an outlet for me. And I really saw how other moms who were experiencing grief and hardship and the loss of something that they thought that they would have through their children, how they were kind of coping with that through writing. Yeah, so that would be, I would say, the first and definitely the most fundamental experience that I did not anticipate having, but that definitely is a cornerstone of my journey.
Wow, that really is an example of metamorphic. Wow. With that said, Dr. Waldron, that's a lot. How did you move forward with the loss of a child, with being on bed rest, your child in the NICU, and already having a child that you were looking
Yeah.
after as well? And as you were doing it, you were living somewhere new. You were also starting a business at the time. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I think again, I was lucky that it really takes a village. We were grouped in with a lot of really awesome people at our church. My parents ended up moving to the area. My sister moved to the area. So I think really having that tribe of friends and family around, I mean, there's no way I think a family gets through something like that without all those people to kind of lean into and lean on. We actually were blessed with my son Holden. He was born 16 months later. So at that point, then I had 3 children under 3. I would like to say that it got better, but it actually took a turn at that point when right after Holden was born, I was diagnosed with MS, and MS lies dormant when you're pregnant. So because I had my boys so close together, I'd had kind of like hints in my 20s when I was teaching that something was awry, but it wasn't until after Holden was born that I was diagnosed. So that was really just a huge blow. Obviously, if you have this idea of what it's going to be like to raise your kids, I'd run a couple marathons in my 20s. I was really active. And the only image I knew of MS were people that were in wheelchairs and, really couldn't get around. And I had a neurologist that said, you can decide what you want this disease to look like. And if you think that's what your life will look like, it will. And that really resonated with me, that I had some agency in this situation and that I could do what I needed to do to try to make the best out of my life. It was not a death sentence, as he said. It really was an opportunity to live with the disease and to eat well and kind of do what I could to make the most of it. It didn't always feel that way. There were a lot of hurdles and a lot of hospitalizations, but definitely it's something now I feel like it's under control, and I've kind of learned to, accept where I am with it, and that it's definitely not linear. MS is a funky disease that does lots of weird things. That was another, I think, test for me of not something I ever anticipated happening. And I had to kind of learn to pivot and to work through that, which was extremely challenging, as you can imagine.
I can imagine. And thank you so much for being so honest and vulnerable and telling this, because that's a lot, from a major diagnosis to the loss of a child to starting a new business. As somebody who is a doctor of clinical psych, you look at the stress checklist and I'm like, you're
Right.
checking multiple
I'm checking
boxes
all the
there.
boxes, checking them all.
You're
Yeah,
checking, but here you are, right? So let's pivot a bit. And I wanted to ask you about your journey that spans K through 12, higher
sure.
ed, and entrepreneurship. Can you take us back to the moment that led you to start Smart Solutions Tutoring and what fueled that decision?
Yeah. So, Summer, my sister was home with her boys, and my mom stayed home. And that was something I think I just really valued. I wanted that time when they were in elementary school to kind of be home with them. But I also really valued being an educator. So, I tried to think outside the box. How can I still be here with my boys, but also put to use my skills as a teacher and my own education? So, I met a tutor here in Richmond, and he really planted this seed that there's plenty of clients for everybody. He was not competitive. He taught me how to kind of set up my business and what that would look like. And I was fortunate to kind of link up with some private schools here and some nonprofits and start my company about 20 years ago. It's kind of grown and ebbed and flowed with me. I went back into the classroom full time when my youngest was in kindergarten. So I kind of tapered it down. And then at different points, it's definitely picked back up. We were full service. Now we exclusively do writing and work with students who are applying to various programs and work with them on their essays and whatnot. But it's really been a labor of love. And it's been something that I think, just as I found value in writing and sharing my own story, that's something we really strive to do with students, is to help them build their confidence on and off the page and to share their story, whether that's for an application, whether that's for a creative writing piece. There are about 8 tutors that work with us. We work with students all over, mostly in Richmond, but we have students all over the US and a few students abroad as well.
I love that. It's so needed. There's so many people, so many young folks who need that type of support to really
Absolutely.
understand and gain a sense of confidence as they're moving through their educational experience, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I can tell you that just from experience being back in high school and my family being the first one to have graduated from a 4-year college,
Right.
I looked at my family and they were successful in their own ways, maybe entrepreneurs, very successful, but they didn't go through that traditional
Sure.
school, that traditional path that I was going through. So I looked to my librarian actually
Oh,
and
that's
asked for
awesome.
the help, right?
Yeah.
And said, "Hey, can you sit down with me as I write my entrance exam? Can you sit down with me and go over it?" And thank God for her, right? So that's what I'm saying. I mean, what you do is highly needed because I remember going through that myself as a young person, and it's been multiple decades since I've been there.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's so different too, Summer. I know when I applied, you picked maybe 3 schools. I worked with a student last year that applied to 22 schools and got into most of them. But, there's a lot of money on the line. They're,
Yeah.
receiving a full scholarship. So definitely is something that is a whole different beast now with Common App and different ways students are applying. They've decided they're applying early and where they're
Yeah.
committing. There's a lot of pressure there. So I think our goal is to try to just normalize the process as much as possible, take that pressure off of parents, and really encourage students to find their voice and to figure out what their best path is.
Oh, that's fantastic.
They get really caught up in all the numbers and having the perfect story. And I remind them they're not writing the great American novel, they're writing their story. And that's what colleges want to see.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, if you could only read mine, it was hilarious. So I think back and go, oh my God, I put that in there. So, but hey, at least I had somebody proofing it and reading it and
Yeah.
saying, hey, this looks good. This is what they want to know, right? So, how has your personal journey shaped your leadership and the culture you create for your students and staff?
That's a really great question. So, like everybody else, I think during COVID, I kind of had a lot of time to reflect and do some soul searching. I knew I had more that I wanted to do, both with my business and in the K 12 sector at that point. So, I decided to go back to school and I was pursuing administration and I was doing this massive internship and all these hours. And during COVID, I was like, do I really want to do this? Do I want to be an assistant principal? And it just didn't really fit, I think, at that point for me. And I had a professor who at one point looked at all of us and said, I think you guys are going to go back and get your doctorate. And all of us were moms. And we looked at her like, you've got to be kidding. We're finishing this internship and we're out of here. We're done. Sign, seal, deliver. This is our last class. And it really resonated with me because it had never dawned on me ever that I could go get a doctorate. Like it wasn't even in like the realm of possibility. I had 3 young boys at home, but it kind of stuck with me. And I was like, well, let me just look and see what it takes to get in. I don't want to have to take the GRE. So I'm, finding all the reasons I shouldn't go back. And during COVID, we found that we had time. So I was like, let me write these essays. Let me apply. Let me just see what happens. And I got in. And then I got a scholarship for getting in for being a non-traditional student. So I've forgotten your original question, Summer, but that was kind of where I think I pivoted and just realized there was more out there. And, there was a trajectory that I thought I was on. But I think that person being there in that right time and let me know there were other options for me in terms of my trajectory with my education.
Oh, fantastic. Also, how has your personal journey helped shape the leadership and the culture you create for your students and staff?
Yeah. No, thank you. I had to come back full circle with that. So I think I lead by example. So often, I think as teachers, we get frustrated that students can't figure something out, but we're doing something we're really good at every single day, right? If I had to go in and teach calculus, it would be a disaster. So I think for me, I remind my students that I make myself vulnerable. I take classes that I'm not really great at. I try things I'm not, exceptional at, and I struggle and I kind of struggle through it. So I think leading by doing is really important to me and showing students that you're willing to kind of put yourself out there as well. It's really easy to tell other people what to do as a leader, but to actually get in there and do the work, I think is a whole different ball of wax.
It certainly is. It absolutely is. With your background in English and journalism, what do you see as the most valuable role of writing in student success today, and how has that evolved?
Yeah. So I think honestly, writing to me is critically thinking on paper. So I think when students are able to articulate their ideas and defend them and give commentary on their ideas and really understand what it is that they're arguing and to find tangible ways to kind of express what those arguments are, that's really, really, really important. So we're in a world where there's a lot of noise and students have a tendency to struggle to kind of figure out what they believe, who they believe in, what they value, and writing gives them room to kind of pause and take the time to flesh out what those ideas look like. I feel that writing is a lifelong skill, whether you are in, an industry that's business related, or you're in IT, or you're in sales or landscaping, whatever. You need to know how to write, you need to know how to communicate, you need to know how to email people. So I just constantly remind students that not only is writing giving you agency to talk about things that you value, but it's also a practical skill that will translate to soft skills once you're in the workplace as well.
It is critical to be able to communicate effectively, and writing is one of those skills that, people may not even realize how good they are at it.
Right.
And as we develop over the years in our writing, it just gets better and better, right?
Yeah.
Because I was an undergrad English lit major at UC Berkeley. And I look back at my stuff going, "Ew, okay." I look at my doctoral program and I go, okay,
Yeah.
much better, right? And
Yeah.
then, there was something I was asked to write recently for a YouTube project for a friend who is a writer. She's published 35 books. She's amazing. And she said, "Hey, Summer, why don't you take your creative writing skills and bring it back?" So I looked at that and I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna try this. And so I sat down and I put everything aside. I gave myself a few hours and it was so much fun. I
Right.
had a blast. I was like, it's not that technical writing. It's not everything else. It's not something I have to do. It's something I want to do. So when you
Right.
really want to do that and you want to learn and you want to put yourself into it, it makes such a difference and things shift for you. So to have something like you offer in Smart Solutions Tutoring can really open up a world of excitement, enlightenment for your students too.
Yeah, I do think that happens. And I think the most fun part is that students are bogged down with all this academic writing, really starting in eighth grade. And we try to mix it up and we'll have them do, creative writing or scripts or, mystery plots. And you just watch these very serious, studious students come alive with like the goofiest storylines and plot twists and everything. So at the end of the day, people love stories. And I think when students have the opportunity to kind of have that creative side come out when they're bogged down in all the GPA and all the other stuff, that's really fun as well.
Well, as someone who works directly with future healthcare professionals, what educational trends or gaps are you seeing and how we prepare students for high stakes, high impact careers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, outside of Smart Solutions, I work at a major Virginia university as a pre health advisor. So, yeah, I think in terms of pre health, one of the most important things to me is really reiterating those soft skills. And I think my career has come full circle, I think, between being an educator, now working in academic advising, and more specifically working with students who are in pre health. I think that they know their academics pretty well, but I think just reminding them the value of knowing the patient behind those numbers and understanding what that person's journey might look like. So it is really, I think, a soft skill that is being embedded across the board in most universities to ensure that healthcare workers really, have that real life skill as they move into the workforce and as they're working with different patient populations.
Yeah, so valuable and so important. You often talk about innovation, pushing boundaries and learning. What does that look like in practical terms for your students and in your own teaching philosophy?
Yeah, so I would say innovation at the university I'm at is a daily thing. I mean, AI has become minors and everything else. But for me, I try to be innovative in regards to bringing in the issues that students are going to see into the classroom. So, most recently, we had people from the Office of Health Initiatives come in and talk with students about health inequities, understanding the background and the demographics of the populations that they'll serve. I think it's really important to meet students where they're at, but to also think about where they're going to be going and to be innovative in terms of making sure that they leave as a well-rounded, fully educated student in regards to not just knowing the academics like we talked about, but also kind of having that whole skill set. So, I mean, I think there's a variety of different ways that schools are being innovative. Internships are pushing into universities big time. They want to make sure that as students graduate, they're not just checking boxes and hitting, math, science, and all that, but also having those real life practicums out in the world so that they're able to actually do the job once they get there and they're not learning on the job. I think that is the most exciting part, Summer, about being in higher ed. It is just truly an innovative atmosphere where there's always something new coming up, always a new program, always looking out at what skills are out there and what skills are lacking and kind of how to bridge that so that students are ready.
That is so important. And I love that because as a master's student, I had a practicum and an internship, right?
Right.
That learning experience, those mentors that I had in the field were
Yeah.
so critical because there were words, phrases, things that I was doing that maybe just didn't jive, or they were things that I was picking up that I had no clue about
Right.
until I did those practicums and internships. And I could ask the questions and not feel so green when I got out into the real world of sorts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just made such a difference. And I remember just being like eyes wide open, ready, but also scared and nervous. But when I got past graduation, because of those practicum and internships, I had a better idea of what I was getting into.
Absolutely. Yeah.
and still keeping my eyes open for different opportunities because I had started out in nonprofit. And then that went all the way into working in emergent care, doing emergency assessments, intakes,
Right.
and being able to be open to those experiences
Yeah.
because of those practicums, because of those internships, because of the mentors that you have and learn from during those times is so valuable.
Couldn't agree more. And it tells you what you don't want to do as well, right? So students go in and they pass out when they stand in an anatomy lab and they realize right away, this is not for me. Like I'm going in a different direction.
You got it, Dr. Waldron. And something about being in the classroom too. And I remember this one particular instance. I had written a paper, and you might have come across this too. I had written a paper, you do all your, technical writing, you do all this stuff, and they give you these vignettes and you write about how you would proceed and what your evaluation would be. And the professor says, but Summer, what are the additional resources you're going to be able to find for that person?
Mhm.
And I was just like, oh, yeah, right. So when I actually got out into the job, I was able to apply that because my professor had already tapped me in regards to think about beyond what you have.
Right.
Think about the other resources you could tap for that person, right? Or you can connect them with. And so when I was working emergent care and we'd have to go into the back offices, do our write up really quickly and look at the resources if we were going to discharge that person versus write orders for inpatient, it was
Right.
like, okay, how can I discharge this person with additional resources?
Right.
And that classroom experience, that feedback from that professor was so important. And that's something that stuck with me.
No, I definitely think so. I remember when I first started teaching, probably like year 4 or 5, I was teaching 12th graders and they just looked so bored. Like, not, I was, let me rephrase that. So I was on a planning block and I was walking down the hall and there was, whole hallway full of seniors. This is before Chromebooks. They were just zoned out, like just totally checked out. And I remember thinking, this is probably back in like 2005. I'm like, what if school was much more interactive? And thankfully, K-12 has really moved in that direction. I mean, teachers really can't give lectures anymore. You're kind of, supposed to stick around 15 or 20 minutes of a mini lesson. It's much more of teacher as facilitator and student as the active learner. So I'm really glad to see that shift. But I think in the same token, higher ed has taken it a step further, that they're really pushing students out of the classroom. I mean, there's a lot of learning, obviously, and there's still a lot of old school lecture that takes place across the board. But I know last year I had one student that I encouraged her to go get an internship as a freshman. And she was basically an intern as a community health worker. And she came into my office and she was like, Meg, I am learning so much. And I was like, oh, in what class? And she's like, in my internship, I'm just going a couple hours a week, but I sit with these people and I grew up in the suburbs. Like I had no idea that these were issues and why people don't go to the doctor and why they don't eat healthy food. Like they can't get to healthy food. They're in a food desert. She was so excited to talk about this and just to relay her experiences. And that's something, honestly, in my opinion, a classroom cannot teach. Like you really need to get out there and do the work in order to understand the impact that you're going to have.
I love hearing that. Isn't that exciting when you hear that from students about how they're learning, their excitement? You're hearing about what they're excited about, what they're learning, what they're passing on, and what they can take into their future with them, right? And so you're one of those people. You're teaching them inside and outside the class, and that is exciting. And with all that we've covered today, and as we come to the close of the interview, for an educator, parent, or student who is listening, what's one actionable tip you'd share about staying resilient and committed to learning during uncertain times?
Yeah. So I would argue, Summer, that you're never going to feel ready. Feeling ready is not something that is going to come inherently. I'm a huge believer of leap and the net will appear. So I think, when you are unsure if you should take the class, you're unsure if you should give the speech, you're unsure if you should run for office, I would argue that you should do it. I tell students all the time, you regret way more things you didn't do than things you did. And especially, I think showing resiliency and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and going for it is something that you're not going to regret.
Thank you so much for that insight, that wisdom in this interview, Dr. Waldron. And thank you for joining me on the Core Women podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. You can follow Dr. Meghan Waldron on LinkedIn and at www.smartsolutionsva.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? great. Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a core women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.